Posted by you/Clean. This happened a week ago, and I have not heard from him since. I have tried texting him, calling him, going to his apartment, and even going to his sister's house. I can't find him, and everybody is telling me they haven't heard from him either. Everybody except his brother, who obviously did not get the memo like everyone else to lie to me. He actually told me that Greg, not his real name, doesn't want to see or speak to me. Here's a brief rundown of how we got here. I, 29F, met Greg, 29M, 3 years ago at a church function. Yes, I know, Reddit hates religion, but it is what it is. I have had a very rough life when it comes to men, so I really don't engage with any of them in conversation other than briefly, if I can get away with it. However, I was listening to Greg speak to a group of people about a book I had just read, so I stood there and listened to him. After he was done talking, the group kind of hung around a little, and I asked him questions about the book. He answered every single one, and the more he talked, the more I was attracted to him. Now, this may not sound like much, but it was the first time I was actually attracted to a guy since high school. As I said, I've had rough experiences, but suffice it to say that after I left high school, I got involved with a very bad crowd. I turned to illicit substances, and when my family had finally had all they could take from me when I was 19, they kicked me out. I don't blame them for this, by the way, because I stole from them to feed my substance addiction. They tried many times to help me, but when I stole a very large sum of money from them and spent it on heroin, they had enough. I lived from friend's house to friend's house, couch surfing for about 6 weeks but still a junkie, and I got caught stealing from them as well. I was homeless for 2 weeks, honestly living on a park bench for a couple of days. I decided to start stripping and everything that goes along with it. In other words, I was doing private parties, private dances, and, yes, it quickly turned into being paid for sex. I honestly don't even remember a lot of that time because whenever I wasn't working, I was either high or working to get high. I did this for a few years. On my 23rd birthday, I overdosed. I had OD'd several times but not to the point of not breathing, and stopped breathing. The paramedics honestly saved my life because they did CPR on me and brought me back. I was in the ICU for 3 days on a ventilator and had several IVs. While I was in the ICU, a preacher came by to see me. He was just a minister who visits with families and patients. He came to me and spoke about how life has a higher purpose. He said a whole lot more, but I won't bore you with it. Needless to say, whether it was him, me being fed up with my life, or God, I don't know, but it really moved me, and when I got out of the ICU, I asked them to help me get off all the substances. It worked. I have been clean since the day I left and have never had a single desire to go back to that. It wasn't easy at first, but every day got better. I got a job, reconnected with my family, and then I met Greg. I had never been in love, not even in high school. But after going on just a few dates, I was head over heels for him. On our 1-year anniversary, he asked me to marry him, with the idea that it would be a year until the wedding. I happily agreed, and it has been the best time of my life. I felt the warmth of his love every single day. But then my mom and dad and I were making wedding plans. They wanted to pay even though I told them not to, and one day while we were talking, the question came up, what did Greg know about my past? They were referring to whether he knew about the substances. My mom and dad don't fully know how far I sunk. The substances were bad enough. My mom said that if Greg never asked, I really should just keep it to myself. She felt I was a different person, and what was in the past should just stay in the past. My dad, however, said something that actually made sense at the time, though I kind of regret listening to him now. He said that even though I had changed, who I was is still a part of who I am, and hiding the past is really like lying. If Greg loved me, he wouldn't care about the past, but if he ever found out on his own or in some other way, he might not be so forgiving because he might consider it a lie. So last weekend, I gathered all the courage I could muster and decided to tell him everything. He knows things my parents don't know, and now I feel very much betrayed. At first, he thought I was joking, but when I assured him I was not, he got quiet and said he appreciated the honesty. He said he didn't know how he felt and needed time to think. That was a week ago. I let him have Saturday through Saturday, only texting him a couple of times just to let him know that I still loved him and to check that he was okay. I also told him that if he had any questions, he could ask me. Well, he never responded, and it has been a week since I've heard from him. I don't know what to do. He has been my rock since we got together. When I've been down, he has picked me up. When I've been sad, he has made me laugh. I truly hope I have not hurt him. I think that would be the worst thing of all. I know my past life was horrible, but it has been 6 years since I've been completely out of that life. I was in another city, actually even in another state. So there is no way that past life can come back to haunt me here. I made no friendships or relationships during that time, so there is nobody who is going to seek me out. Can anyone please tell me what I can do or say to make things right with him? I really love him with all my heart, and will do anything to fix this. Edit. We have been at my place all afternoon talking. I'm not going to lie, it has been rough. I cried more today than I've ever cried in my life, but we are talking, and as of now, we are still together, just no longer engaged, at his request. By the way, all of the crying has not been sad cries, he has also been very open about his past, and it touched me that he felt compelled to be this open when he didn't have to. I don't know if anyone really cares, but I'll try to write a full update later tonight. Thank you all so much for the words of encouragement. It has helped me far more than you will ever know. Update 2 days later. The title of the post was really inaccurate on my part because he did get in touch with me, and we met for several hours on Sunday. So, he didn't ghost me, he never intended to ghost me, and his family did not lie for him. In fact, before we had time to talk at church, his brother came to me and apologized for the way he handled my phone call. He said he clearly did not understand his brother's wish to be alone to think and had interpreted that on his own to mean that he didn't want to talk to me. The rest of his family had no idea there was any significant problem and did not know where he was because he went away for the week and told them to only contact him in case of an emergency. Obviously, they knew something was up, but they had no idea. So, the ghosting part was a combination of miscommunication and, well, honestly just anxiety and impatience on my part. We both apologized for that and moved on. Anyway, we met at church for morning service. I got there first and went to sit in our usual spot, and he arrived just as the service was starting. He came over, sat down beside me, and we shared a quick smile as the service began. I was dying inside. After the service, as people were shaking hands and talking, his brother came to me to apologize, and while we were talking, he slipped away to chat with a few other people. I have a feeling this was planned, but whatever. He came back over and asked how I was, and I almost lost it, but I held it together and said I was okay, though I was obviously tearing up as we spoke. He asked if I wanted to talk then or later, and I just wanted to get it over with because if he was going to break up with me, I wanted it to be done so I could go home and start grieving. So, I said I was ready. He said he really wanted to talk somewhere private and asked where I'd prefer to go, and all I could think of was my place so I wouldn't have to drive afterward. He followed me home, came inside, and said he really wanted the conversation to be civil, not a good sign. By this point, I was already a bundle of nerves, so I blurted out, "Are you going to leave me?" Obviously, I was crying as I said this. What he said next gave me a lot of hope because I had really thought it was a done deal. He said that a lot of what happens going forward would depend on what I said that day and how much I was willing to tolerate from him. That last part really confused me, but I was so relieved that he didn't say yes that I basically collapsed into my chair and told him I was ready to do whatever it took. He then said that if that was the case, he would ask 2 things of me: honesty and patience. He started off apologizing for not being a better man. That was all I could take. When he said that, the floodgates opened. Here was this wonderful man who I had basically lied to and who had been told probably one of the worst things a future spouse could hear, yet he was apologizing to me. I had to hug him and tell him not to apologize. He held me while I cried for a few minutes, but I tried to gather myself to listen to him. He went on to say that he had a horrible week. He said he had to face many of his own insecurities, jealousies, and prejudices. He also said he had learned something about himself that he did not like. He said that until I told him my story, he hadn't realized how possessive and jealous he was. He talked a lot about it, but I'll skip over that because it was very personal and, well, this is already going to be as long as a book. He then asked if I was willing to put up with him having some very probing questions and making some very personal comments about them. Again, I said I would do whatever it took. So, he asked the following questions. 1. Did I use protection every time? 2. Did I have any sexual interactions in the city we live in now? 3. Did I have any idea how many people I had sex with? 4. Have I been tested for STDs, and if so, when was the last time, and did I keep records of it? 5. Am I willing to be tested again and even in the future? 6. Did I ever have sex with anyone without them being a customer? 7. What types of substances did I take? 8. When was the last time I took substances? 9. Do I feel any need or desire to take substances since the incident occurred? 10. How can I guarantee that I won't turn back to substances in the future? 11. Does sex have real meaning for me, and do I enjoy it, or is it just something I do to be close to him? 12. How much money did I steal? 13. Did I pay back the money? 14. Have I ever stolen money or anything else without it being for substances? 15. How can I guarantee him that I won't steal from him in the future? It took several hours to answer these questions because I often had to stop and compose myself, but I answered each one as honestly as I could. He often told me I didn't have to answer if I didn't want to and kept apologizing for asking, but he said he needed to know in order to move forward. He then listed his concerns and asked if I really wanted to work on them with him, saying he would understand if I didn't. I told him I wouldn't be there if I didn't want to try. His concerns were as follows. A. He is afraid that if times get rough in the future, I might steal from him or his family. Honestly, I was surprised by this, as it wasn't something I thought would be an issue, but it was the first thing he mentioned. To be fair, his family owns a business. They aren't rich, but they aren't poor either, so I guess he's worried that if he takes over, I might steal. B. He has an irrational fear that once a junkie, always a junkie. He said he doesn't know how strong he is and that it would be the end of him if we stayed together and I fell back into that world. C. He fears sex will be an issue going forward. He said he's had horrible intrusive thoughts all week. The fact that I've been with so many people and done so many different things makes him afraid that nothing would ever be special. He's worried he'll become bitter, feeling like we're just having sex for him, and that this would significantly diminish his desire for me. I listened to him and answered each concern as best I could. He acknowledged that many of these fears were things I could never fully guarantee, but he just needed to express them. I told him I understood and had already anticipated that some of this would come up. We spent several hours discussing everything, taking breaks so our emotions wouldn't overwhelm us. He went through a range of emotions, but I knew I had to let him if I wanted this to work. He told me he was willing to stay and try to make it work because he really loves me. Obviously, my heart leapt at this, and I cried again. You'd think with everything I've been through, I'd be tougher. However, he said he didn't feel we could go through with the wedding as scheduled and that he would like to end our engagement and continue dating, exclusively, for a while. He said that while he believes me and feels like he knows me, he wants to take the time to reassess everything from a new perspective. I took off my ring to give it to him, and for the first time, he broke down and cried. He told me to put it back on and said he just wanted to postpone the wedding, not end the engagement. I told him we could do whatever he thought was best. He said we'd tell people we were postponing due to scheduling conflicts and would announce a new date later. Then, we had to decide what to tell our families. He said he'd tell his family he was feeling pressured at work and got upset over a misunderstanding about time away. I told him I would say whatever he wanted. He said it was best not to tell anyone else about my past, except for our minister, as we are going to start couples counseling. We both agreed to this. As for my family, this was where the one problem of the day arose. He had assumed my family knew everything. I told him they only knew about the substances and stealing. He thought my parents should know because they are paying for the wedding, and canceling events might cause issues. He didn't want them to think it was just because I used substances years ago. It wasn't a deal breaker for him, but he felt it was the right thing to do. However, he said he would abide by whatever I thought best. I really don't want to tell my parents. What I did was bad enough, stealing and using substances, but if they knew I stripped and sold myself, I don't think I could ever look them in the eye again, and they have been so wonderful to me since I came back. In conclusion, this ended better than I ever dreamed possible. Yes, I know he has a diminished view of me, and he was really upset that I waited so long to tell him, but he said that once he gets over the initial shock, he will try his best not to bring it up again. He truly is a wonderful man, and I am so very lucky that God put him in my life. Edit. Wow, there are a lot of serious misconceptions being sent to me via DM about my life. Let me make this clear, I did not grow up in an abusive household. I was never SA'd as a child or teenager. I had a loving family whose hearts I broke through my own actions. I am blessed beyond words that they have accepted me back and have been nothing but loving and supportive. Both of my parents are my heroes. My mom was just trying to protect me, she wasn't trying to be my accomplice. Secondly, to address this here, if I wanted to stay with him, I had to let him ask me those questions. He gave me every opportunity to shut it down, and even several times while we were talking, he asked if I wanted him to stop. He was hurting, by his own words, from his own insecurities. Answering the questions, even as uncomfortable as they were, bonded us in my opinion because he actually engaged in conversation with me and listened to everything I said. Besides, some of my answers are not nearly as dramatic as some of you have believed. Second update 1 month later. First off, things have been great between us. I mean, there have been issues, but nothing that I didn't expect or anything that I can't handle. I'm still happy that he is in my life. When I last left off, he had asked me to tell my parents because he was afraid they would think he was being overly critical of a previous substance habit. But he also told me that he wouldn't make that a deal breaker, he just thought it would be a good idea. Well, after thinking about it more, I just felt like I did not want to have to tell my parents about that part of my life. I believed with all my heart that they would have supported me, but I just did not want to go through all the emotions of telling them. I explained this to him, and he was fine with it. He said he respected my thoughts on it and would never say a word to them. I decided on my own to tell them that we were postponing the wedding. I told them that after we had talked, he wanted to stay together and just wanted more time to think about things. I thought this was best because I didn't want him to be there to have to explain anything. If something came up, I did not want him to feel trapped. I told them, and they were disappointed, obviously, but they understood. He had given me money to give them to pay back their deposits, but they said they did not want it and told us to keep the money. I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I ever wrong. He came over for Thanksgiving dinner. He had lunch with his family, and I was invited but could not attend because I didn't get off work until late and then had to help my mom make dinner. He got to my parents' house around 4 or so, and we ate dinner at 5:30. My parents, both sets of grandparents, and several cousins were there. Dinner went fine. We ate, and everybody was having a good time until my cousin, who is several years younger than me, 12F, asked when we were getting married. There was a long, it seemed forever, awkward silence, and he just sat there looking at me for guidance. He spoke up and said, "Probably next summer," to which my mother's mother heard this and, obviously, nobody had told her that the date was off. Well, she proceeded to ask if she had the dates wrong in her calendar, to which my mom quickly jumped in to say there were scheduling conflicts. Well, that should have been it, but instead of accepting that, my grandmother started asking about what scheduling conflicts there were and, if it was the church or minister, she was determined to get this straightened out. This went on for a good half hour, and I could just tell by the look on his face that he was sick of it. He never said a word, but he looked very upset. Finally, my family started to leave at about 8:30 or so. After everybody said their goodbyes, he and I went back to the living room and sat on the couch. I apologized profusely to him, and he said he was fine, but I could tell he wasn't really fine, although he was starting to be less tense. My parents came back in from the front porch after saying goodbye to their parents. They sat down, and my dad apologized to both of us, saying that our family means well but can sometimes be overbearing. The three of us laughed, but I noticed my mom wasn't laughing. My mom proceeded to take a bad situation that was under control and actually ending, only to decide to dump buckets of gasoline on it. She said she felt bad for her mom because she thought she was upset about my grandfather, my mom's dad, having health issues and fearing he wouldn't live to see my wedding. Here is where it all went to hell. She said it was silly to postpone things over a substance addiction that hasn't been a problem for several years. My boyfriend just sat there, but I could physically both see and feel him tense up. I was holding his hand. My dad spoke up, and he and my mom started arguing over it. From what they were saying to each other, I could tell they had discussed this after I had told them. No surprise there, and it was evident that, even though my dad was trying to be polite and make my mom stop, he pretty much felt the same way. I just couldn't take it anymore. I felt absolutely horrible for Greg. He not only had to sit through my grandparents' questions but was now having to endure my parents' confrontation, and everyone was blaming him for all of this. It wasn't fair to him. I spoke up and told my parents that I needed to talk to them and that they needed to stop arguing and stop blaming Greg for any of this. He squeezed my hand, indicating that I should stop. I looked at him, and he shook his head no. I told him that, no, this was not fair to him, and ultimately, it wasn't fair to them either because they were blaming him for the wrong reasons. Obviously, this got their attention. I went ahead and told them that after they had kicked me out of the house, I had no home, no job, no education, no skills, nothing. I only told them that I became an exotic dancer. I just couldn't bring myself to tell them more. But they aren't dumb. My mom immediately gasped and started to cry. My dad just sat there, dumbfounded, and tried to calm her down. My mom, after being hysterical for a few minutes, apologized to Greg. She said she had no idea and that he was a wonderful man for staying with me even knowing that. I'm not too sure how I feel about that statement, but I guess, in the end, she was coming from a good place, I think. The main thing was that it did take the blame off of him. My dad tried to lighten the mood by saying that this was just a typical Thanksgiving, trying to be funny. I asked Greg if he would mind if I talked with my parents and that I would see him on Friday. I walked him out, and we kissed goodnight. I told him how wonderful I thought he was, and he told me I didn't need to tell them. He wasn't going to say anything. I said I knew he wouldn't, but it was never going to get better with them unless they knew the truth. I went back in and spent the next several hours talking with my parents. Needless to say, it was heartbreaking on several levels. My dad openly cried, and I had never seen that before. He blames himself for this. He said he never should have kicked me out and that he ruined my life. No matter what I said or did, I could not console him. My mom tried as well, but nothing was working. We all went to bed, and I was woken up by my mom panicking and calling 911. My dad was having chest pain. The ambulance came and said he was having a heart attack. They took him to a hospital that specializes in heart problems. My dad looked horrible, and I was more scared than I have ever been. I called Greg, and he came to pick up my mom and me and drove us to the hospital. They wouldn't let us back to see him as they rushed him into surgery. The doctor came out and told us that the ambulance most likely saved his life by recognizing what was happening. A surgeon was already with him, putting in stents and using a device to remove a blood clot they found. We called our minister, and he arrived within half an hour. My dad is scheduled to come home tomorrow. He looked great tonight and said he felt perfectly fine. Greg has been a rock for both my mom and me. When he left to get us food, my mom actually told me I needed to make sure to keep him because the only man she knew who was better was my dad. I'm just grateful that my dad is going to be okay. Greg said tonight when he dropped me off at home that life is never dull with me. We both laughed. I have to try to help my dad realize that what he did was tough love and that he can't blame himself for my poor choices. He didn't just kick me out after the first, second, or even 23rd time. They tried for a couple of years to reach me, but I wasn't having it. I spoke with my minister about therapy for my dad, and he said he would speak to him as his minister and recommend another therapist if my dad is open to it. Hopefully, this should put an end to any updates. I know that Greg is the love of my life, and I am doing everything in my power to make sure he knows how much he means to me and how I will never betray his trust.